another headline that's actually from a couple of months ago, but what caught my attention this time was the fact that it was being promoted by Northrop Grumman, the military contract, and I guess they probably have their hands in a lot of different pies besides military hardware, but they published something back in April called Hiding in Plain Sight, The Arguments for Invisible Aliens. And, that really struck a chord with me, not least of which because some of the things that they talk about are exactly the kinds of points made by these articles covering the signs of life, the phosphine in the clouds of Venus, in terms of the building blocks of life. But this idea that there could be some kind of invisible ecosystem, some shadow ecosystem right here, and they use the obvious examples of places we wouldn't expect life to exist, volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean and that sort of thing. But, that's, again, old hat for anybody who's watched old Jacques Cousteau or nature documentaries. But again, it struck me as kind of odd that Northrop Grumman, of all places, would be perhaps cashing in on the interest in these subjects. Lo and behold, at the very bottom of the article is are you looking for a career? Then maybe consider us. So maybe this is their way of trying to look to see if they can get the next, former military industrial insider like Tom DeLonge has tried to put together. But it reminds me of so many other things, including one of my fondest ideas that's didn't originate with me, but this idea of the what John Keel and others called ultra-terrestrials, or what Mac Tonnies later called crypto-terrestrials. It kind of morphed into another idea phrased as a breakaway civilization. But this idea that there could be what if the UFOs, what if what we think of as aliens are not aliens, that they are just other inhabitants of this planet? Is there some way that they could have either evolved here separately or branched off from us early on? And of course, the wilder parts of this go into all the fun stuff like the inner Earth and the hollow Earth, and these ideas that, well, maybe this civilization is either inside the planet, and that's part of how they're staying crypto, how they're keeping hidden, or perhaps, maybe they're just under the oceans, maybe they're at the bottom, and lo and behold, where are we hearing about all these the documented military sightings, but from the naval arm of the military in terms
of wild with the OSU thing,
ATIP,
the USOs, excuse me. First of all, Miles, what a great in aggregate, what a nice collection of stories for everybody out there. In one spot, you're going to have access to all this stuff, all the hard work's done on the back end. So you talk about one-stop shopping. What I noticed today in the order that we have these, the first two stories aren't, they're more related than you would think. So we got to think about things that the eyeballs can't see. So we're talking about the spectral light ranges that go beyond, what we see in red, green, blue, for example. We don't see in infrared or any of the expanded spectral ranges. But yet here on this planet, we know that many animals utilize additional or expanded spectral ranges to sense information in their environment. And so in our first story about the phosphine, that's exactly the methodology they use to detect these gases, were non-visible spectral ranges. And then as you segue into the invisible aliens notion with Northrop Grumman, there's your continuity across the different stories. And so they're both kind of, the first story about the phosphine is leveraging the technology as we understand it today to find additional insights, whereas the Northrop one is using that same foundation then to speculate a step further, which is a little bit more into that recruiting tool aspect that you pointed out. But they're very related, and I'm glad you put up the links. We won't go into too much detail tonight. I would want to say, though, if you guys do read the article about the phosphine and potential for life in the atmosphere of Venus, remember this notion was basically first championed by Carl Sagan in like 1963. So he had first identified the stratigraphy of atmospheres. And then what you do is you correlate pressure and temperature regimes across the stratigraphy of your atmosphere. Just like how you'd have layers of rocks, you're going to have different densities and different compositions of the layer of an atmosphere. So basically what on Venus in particular, you're looking at somewhere in the range of about 40 to 70 kilometers up into the atmosphere is where we find conditions that are very similar to what we call one atmosphere on Earth. So that would be like one atmosphere of pressure. That's like when you're standing on the surface of the Earth, so it doesn't crush us. It's not going to crush them. But then also the temperature range. So look at it about 60 to 65 degrees. So up there in the stratigraphy of the atmosphere of Venus is this very balmy little layer, this little pesky layer that Sagan had pointed out, where he said, man, we really got to look there. You read the article, scientists love to take credit for everything, but if you really go back and look at this, Sagan was all over this decades ago. They called it very speculative. The fact that Sagan, this many years later is being taken seriously enough to where they're using his principles and approaches to apply very expensive equipment. Anyway, my point is it just shows the legacy that he left behind in terms of some of this and really setting the stage for the kind of stories that we're literally reading tonight.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. And one other thing that Northrop Grumman article reminded me of is another wonderful man I met through, like Jim Beal, through my local consciousness community of friends, the different nonprofits that I've been involved with, was a gentleman named Ravi, who he unfortunately passed away about 5 years ago suddenly. But when we'd had conversations, and he was very much a hard skeptic, but he was also open-minded, like the best skeptics. And when we once talked about what he thought about the likelihood of extraterrestrial life and UFOs, he said, well, what interests him the most, because he started really getting into biology, even though he was more of a physics, electrical engineer kind of a guy. What really fascinated him was what he described, and I'm probably not the best person to try to describe this to the lay audience, but he kind of phrased it as left-hand molecule life forms. And he basically talked about how he explained to me how there could be these whole other range of life forms that would be a completely different biology than us. That's if we are the right hand path, so to speak, in terms of traditional biology, or the way we think of as traditional biology, that there could be these other and I don't know if it's a spin on the molecules or why he was calling it left hand per se, but he was absolutely certain. He was like, this is something that could exist. It's not something that you would think would be in our neck of the universe, but there, to his knowledge, wouldn't be any reason why it wouldn't. And it could be right in front of us and we wouldn't see it. So,
well, the good thing is we now have those analogs here on Earth due to a number of different universities. But I think one of the more relevant examples is a type of bacteria, or microorganism, let's call it that. And this has got a great name because some people might recognize it for its correlation to the New York State lake. But that's the Schwannella onididennis bacterial community. Okay, this was first identified in a lake up there. This is very similar to the type of organism that they believe is producing this phosphine. And basically, these are known as extremophiles. Extremophiles are biological life, particularly microorganisms that we didn't think had an analog here on Earth. They were speculated for a very long time. But now that we've gotten better instruments and we've actually taken the step to go look in these extreme environments for life, think of the tailing ponds of the Butte School of Mines in Montana, your volcanic environments, Iceland, you mentioned earlier the black smokers at the bottom of the ocean, hydrothermal vents, you name it. Everywhere we're looking now, we're finding organisms that respirate, essentially, that's what we're talking about here, in environments that are devoid of any of the elements that you would normally think could be combined to sustain life or create respiration, right? To metabolize, that's really what that means. And so they're getting their food from very unconventional source chemicals, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, and it all goes back to the simple idea that life will find a way. Not to sound like Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park or something, but if you just think about it, like, okay, you're walking along the sidewalk, and what do you see breaking up through it? Life.
Yeah.
What do you see at the top of the highest mountain? Life.